Hey everyone, in this video we'll implement character movement. It's going to look like this. So the character movement will be related to the camera, just like we see in all third-person games. Alright, so let's start the video. So first, I'll replace this capsule with an actual character. When implementing character movement, we won't be able to see the rotation properly if we are using a capsule. Alright, so let me switch this with an actual character. So I'll be downloading the character from a website called mixamo.com. So this site has lots of good characters and high quality animations, and they're completely free. So I'll open up mixamo.com, and you'll have to create an Adobe account to use this. Alright, so I'll go to the characters section and download a character. So the character I want to use is Erika. Alright, so this is the character I want to use. So I'll click on it and then click use this character. So once you do that, you'll be able to see the character in this window. And by the way, you don't have to use this same character. There are lots of different characters to choose from. Alright, I'll just go with this character. So let me click on the download button. And for the format, we have to select FBX for Unity. And then we want the pose in T-pose itself. So just make sure these two options are correct. And then you can click on the download button and the character will be downloaded as an FBX file. Alright, so I've saved it to my desktop. So now let's go ahead and import the character into Unity. So under assets, I'll create a new folder called models. So this is where we'll put all the 3D models. So next, I'll drag the FBX file that I downloaded into the models folder. Okay. So the model is imported. So I'll drag the model to the scene so that we can have a better look. Alright, let me just get rid of the capsule now. So yeah, you can see the character model, but it doesn't have any textures on it. So to fix that, select the model and in the materials tab, click on the extract textures button. Alright, so we need to specify a folder in which the textures will be extracted. So here I'll create a new folder for that. Let me call it textures. Alright, and I'll select this folder. Okay, so now we're getting this warning saying that normal map textures should be marked as normal map. So here we just have to click on the fix now button and it'll automatically fix it for us. Alright, so now we have the textures. Awesome. So next let's implement the script to move this character. So inside the scripts folder, I'll create a new script called player controller. Alright, so let me open it up in Visual Studio and I'll also get rid of the default code. So in this script, we should move the player based on the input of the user, right? So first I'll get the input from the update function. So let me create the update function over here. And then I'll get both horizontal and vertical input. Alright, let me store the horizontal input in a variable called h. And then I'll also get the vertical input. And I'll store it in a variable called v. Alright, so we have the input. So next let me create a vector based on these two inputs. So I'll call this vector move input. Alright, so this will be a vector 3 and the x value of the vector will be the horizontal input, the y value will be 0 and the z value will be the vertical input. Alright, so this is a direction in which we should move the player, and here we have to do one more thing. We have to normalize this vector. So I'll use a normalized property to normalize this vector. So what this will do is, this will set the length of the vector to 1. If we don't do this, then the diagonal movement will be faster than the movement in a single direction. So that can be solved very easily by normalizing the vector. Okay, so now we have the movement input. So next we should move the character based on this input. So to move the character, I'll update the transform.position, and to the position we can add move input so that the character will move in the direction of the input. And then we should be able to control the speed of the movement, right? So for that, I'll create a variable called move speed, and let me just set it to 5 by default. And here we should multiply the move speed with the movement input. Alright, so now the character will move in the speed. And finally, we should also multiply this whole thing with time.delta time so that the movement is frame rate independent. Okay, so now the character should move based on our input. So let's go to Unity and test it. Alright, so first we should assign the player controller script to our player. So I won't attach it to the model directly. Instead, I'll create an empty game object here called player. Alright, let me reset its position. And then I'll make the model a child of the player game object. Okay, I'm doing it like this because in the future we'll have to add more things to this player game object. Alright, so now we can go ahead and attach the player controller script to the player. And then in the camera controller script, the follow target reference will be missing because we deleted the capsule. So now let's go ahead and assign our player. Alright, so now let's go ahead and run the game. So the camera is moving around the player just like before. And now when we press the WASD keys or the arrow keys, the character should move. Alright, so the character is moving. So if I press the up arrow key, it's moving forward. If I press the down arrow key, it's moving backwards. And then it's also moving left and right when I press those keys. Alright, so the movement is working as we expected, but this is not how the character should move in a third-person setup. Right now, when we press the forward input, the character is moving in its forward direction, but it should actually move in the camera's forward direction. Right? In a third-person controller, the movement of the player should be relative to the camera. So to achieve that, all you have to do is multiply our move input with the rotation of the camera. Right? This will make the movement relative to the camera. So first we need to get a reference to the camera from the script. So let me actually create a variable for the camera controller over here. Alright, and then I'll cache a reference to it from the awake function. So since the camera and player are attached to different objects, we can't simply use the getComponent function. Instead, we'll have to get the reference to the camera's game object first. So we can get the reference to the camera's game object by calling camera.main property. And then on that, we can call getComponent and get the camera controller. Okay, so let me cache this to the camera controller variable. And now we can multiply the move input with the rotation of the camera. Alright, so I'll get the rotation from camera controller.transform.rotation, and then I'll multiply it with the move input. Okay, so I'll store this in a variable called move direction. I'll just say dir for short, and then here I'll use the movement direction variable instead of the movement input. So this should rotate the movement input in the camera's direction. But there's actually a problem with this. Our character should only be able to move in the XZ plane, right? It should only be able to move in the horizontal plane. So when we multiply the move input with the camera's rotation, we should only take the camera's horizontal rotation. We should not take the vertical rotation. So if we use the vertical rotation, then the player will also be able to move up and down. So we don't want that unless you're making a player that can fly. So let me go to Unity and show you what happens when we use the complete rotation. All right. So here the movement is related to the camera, but the player can also move up and down. So if the camera is facing up like this, then the player will be able to fly. All right, so we don't want that. So here we should only take the horizontal rotation of the camera. So we can get the horizontal rotation from rotation Y, right? So what I'll do is in the camera controller script, I'll create a new property called planar rotation. So this will be the rotation in the XZ plane or the horizontal plane. All right. And in this property, we should return a quaternion. So I'll create a quaternion by using quaternion.Euler. And here we should only consider the Y rotation. We should not consider the X rotation like we do over here. So I'll pass 0 for the X rotation, and then I'll pass rotation Y variable for the Y, and then I'll pass 0 for the Z. So this will give us the planar rotation of the camera. And now from the player controller, we can simply multiply the move input with the planar rotation. All right. And by the way, if you're not familiar with properties in C#, I'll explain it real quick. So properties are a pretty cool feature in C#. So usually in most programming languages, if you want to return something like this from a class, you would create a public function, right? So usually you would create a public function like get planar rotation, and then from that function you would return this value, right? So this is how you would usually return something from a class. But in C#, we have a cool feature called properties. So properties are just like a function. The only difference is they won't have this parenthesis that a function has, right? So you don't have this feature in most of the programming languages. So I just want to give you a quick explanation in case you don't know what properties were. And by the way, if you want to use a function over here like this, it's totally fine. I just like using properties since they are shorter. All right, so let me get rid of the function. So now the movement input is only multiplied with the planar rotation. So the character shouldn't be able to move up and down. All right, so let's go to Unity and test it. All right, so the character is not able to move up and down, but it is moving related to the camera. So now when I press the forward key, it's not moving in its forward direction. Instead, it's moving in the forward direction of the camera, right? So that's working fine. So next, when moving the character should rotate and face the direction in which it is moving, right? So we just have to set the rotation of the character to make it face in the right direction. So from here, I'll also set the rotation of the character. So we want the character to face in this move direction, right? But move direction is a vector, and for the rotation, we have to pass a quaternion. So we can actually get the rotation from a direction vector by using quaternion dot look rotation function, and we have to pass the directional vector in the parameter of this function. Okay, so this will make the character face in the direction in which it's moving, but we should really update the direction when the character is moving, right? So how can we check if the character is moving? So for that, I'll create a new variable called move amount over here. So this variable will be a sum of horizontal and vertical input. And if the move amount is greater than 0, then that means the character is moving and we can update the rotation. All right. But we can't simply add the horizontal and vertical input like this. We should remove the sign of the horizontal and vertical input, right? Here, we don't care about the direction of the input. We only care about the amount. So if the horizontal input is -1, we should remove the sign and make it 1. So to remove the sign from a value, we can use the mathf dot abs function. So here abs stands for absolute, since this function returns the absolute value by removing the sign. All right, and let me also do it for the vertical input. And now if the move amount is greater than 0, then that means the player is moving. So we can move the code to set the rotation inside this if, and we can actually move this line also, because there is no point in trying to move the character if the input is 0, right? So I'll actually move these two lines inside this if condition. All right. So now the character should face in the direction in which it's moving. Okay, so let's go to Unity and test it. All right, so you can see that the character is facing the move direction. Okay, but the problem is the character is rotating instantly, right? That looks really weird. We don't want the rotation to be instant. We want it to rotate smoothly, right? So let's look at how we can achieve that. So to make the rotation smooth, we should not set the rotation directly like this. Instead, I'll store this rotation in a variable called target rotation. All right. So here, instead of setting the rotation directly, I'll store it to the target rotation variable. And then outside this condition, we can slowly change the current rotation of the player to the target rotation, right? So to slowly change one rotation to another, we have a function called quaternion dot rotate towards. All right. So in the first parameter, we have to pass the from rotation. So here the from rotation will be the current rotation of the player, and then to rotation will be the target rotation. And finally, in the third parameter, we should pass the amount by which we should change the rotation. So using the third parameter, you can control how slow or fast the rotation change should happen. So I'll actually create a variable for that called rotation speed. All right. And I'll set its value to something high like 500 by default. The reason is because the function expects the rotation amount as an angle in degrees. So here 500 is the angle of rotation. All right. So now we can pass it as the third parameter. And then we should also multiply it with time.delta time to make it frame rate independent. And finally, we should set the value returned by this function to our transform dot rotation. All right. So this will smoothly rotate the player instead of rotating it instantly. And by the way, Let me split this into 2 lines because I don't like lines that are really long. Okay. So now let's go ahead and test if the rotation is working. So I'll just select the player and make sure that the rotation speed is 500. Alright. So now let's go ahead and test it. Okay. So now it's rotating smoothly. You can actually play with the value of rotation speed and find a speed that you like. I think this is fine. So we successfully made our character move based on the input. So next we should implement animations when the character moves. So we'll implement that in the next video.